In 2005, Star Wars Episode III: Revenge of the Sith brought the prequel trilogy to its most ambitious chapter, and behind its massive space battles, alien worlds, and lightsaber duels was some seriously impressive filmmaking. From actors riding mechanical rigs to real animatronic aliens, miniature lava flows, practical costumes, and visual effects that transformed ordinary sets into entire planets. So today, we're going behind the scenes of Revenge of the Sith to uncover how some of the movie's most memorable scenes were actually created, and you'll probably be surprised by how much of what you see on screen was real. The climactic duel between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker on Mustafar is not only one of the most memorable lightsaber battles in Star Wars history, it's also an incredible showcase of just how many different filmmaking techniques were working together behind the scenes. On screen, we see Obi-Wan and Anakin fighting across a volcanic world, surrounded by rivers of lava, erupting volcanoes, collapsing structures, smoke, fire, and a massive industrial complex caught in the middle of the destruction. But none of this was created on a single giant set. Instead, George Lucas and the artists at Industrial Light and Magic combined practical sets, miniature photography, real volcanic footage, motion control photography, and digital visual effects to make Mustafar feel like one enormous continuous world. And the process actually began long before Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor ever stepped onto the set. The choreography for the duel was created by stunt coordinator Nick Gillard, and the actors spent months training and rehearsing the entire battle. They weren't simply learning a few cool sword swings. They had to memorize complicated combinations of attacks, blocks, spins, footwork, changes in direction, and precise timing so that the entire fight could flow almost like a single piece of choreography. Christensen later recalled that he and McGregor spent months practicing the battle, while specifically praising Gillard for making the choreography tell a story, rather than simply turning the scene into a series of flashy sword moves. In fact, Gillard's choreography was so demanding that the actors trained for long periods before filming. Sword fighter and stunt performer Kyle Rowling, who worked on the production, recalled that the preparation lasted around 3 months, with extremely intensive training sessions. Hayden and Ewan were capable of learning very large sections of choreography and performing them at full speed. And that's one of the most impressive things about the finished duel. The rapid lightsaber exchanges were largely performed by the actors themselves. Unlike many action sequences, where performers are replaced by stunt doubles for extended portions of the fight, McGregor and Christensen performed their lightsaber combat themselves. Their months of preparation allowed the filmmakers to capture the choreography at extraordinary speed. The finished sequence was not simply created by digitally speeding up the actors' movements, although a few individual frames were removed in certain moments to make specific strikes feel even faster. But once the choreography was ready, the production faced another massive problem. How do you put 2 actors in the middle of a volcanic planet? Obviously, building an entire world covered in lava, cliffs, volcanoes, and enormous industrial structures as a full-scale set would have been impossible. So the filmmakers broke Mustafar into different layers. The sections that the actors actually needed to interact with were constructed as physical sets in Australia. This gave McGregor and Christensen real surfaces to stand on, climb across, jump between, and fight around. But everything extended far beyond those practical areas: massive lava rivers, distant cliffs, volcanic formations, and much of the surrounding industrial landscape could be created separately through miniature photography and digital effects. And this is where ILM's miniature work becomes particularly impressive. For Mustafar, the visual effects team built a gigantic miniature landscape measuring roughly 8 meters wide and 11 meters long. It was primarily used for establishing shots of the planet's surface around the mining facility. The terrain was carved with high-density foam, then covered with resin and paint to give the rocks their volcanic texture. But the most interesting part was hidden inside the miniature. Clear channels were built into the landscape so that actual flowing material could be photographed as lava. And that lava was not simply a CGI simulation. ILM used a trick substance called methyl cellulose, also known as methocell, mixed with yellow dye. The miniature itself was tilted so that the material could naturally flow through specially constructed channels. Powerful studio lights were positioned underneath those transparent channels, illuminating the liquid from below. This combination made the thick glowing material look remarkably similar to molten lava when photographed. The team could also manipulate the appearance of the lava by changing its thickness and lighting, producing different shades of red, orange, and yellow. Black powdered cork was added to the flowing material to create the appearance of chunks of volcanic rock being carried along by the lava. And because the same material had to keep moving through the miniature, a pumping and filtration system recycled it from the bottom back toward the top. So when you see those enormous lava rivers flowing through the Mustafar landscape, you're not necessarily looking at a computer simulation. In many of those shots, you're actually watching a physical miniature with real liquid flowing through it, photographed like a miniature movie set. Meanwhile, the physical sections of the environment that the actors actually interacted with were built on the studio stage. These practical structures were important because they gave Hayden and Ewan something real to perform against. Their feet could actually hit the ground, their bodies could interact with the platforms, and the camera could capture real shadows and physical movement. Then ILM could extend that environment far beyond the edges of the practical set. The enormous cliffs, distant lava flows, erupting volcanic formations, smoke, sparks, falling ash, and industrial structures could be added later through visual effects. The final result was essentially a visual effects puzzle. Real actors were photographed against practical environments. Miniature photography supplied the larger landscape. Real Mount Etna footage supplied additional volcanic imagery, and digital effects connected everything together into a single world. Even the lightsabers themselves were designed around the choreography. During filming, Hayden and Ewan used practical stunt lightsaber props that they could safely swing and manipulate at high speed. This gave the actors a physical object to hold and react to, making it much easier to maintain accurate spacing and timing during the choreography. The glowing blades we see in the final movie were then created through visual effects work. After the epic duel between Anakin and Obi-Wan, let's look at another clever, practical technique used throughout Revenge of the Sith. Mechanical rigs that gave actors real physical movement, even when the final environment would be almost entirely digital. For Senator Bail Organa's Narglach Airtech XJ2 airspeeder, the production built an actual cockpit prop and mounted it on a heavy mechanical gimbal in front of a green screen. Instead of simply asking Jimmy Smits to pretend the vehicle was flying, the rig could tilt, rotate, and suddenly shift the cockpit in different directions. This gave his body genuine momentum as the speeder banked and turned. The same basic idea was used for Obi-Wan's Varactyl, or Boga chase sequence. Ewan McGregor wasn't actually sitting on a CGI creature, he was positioned on a specially built mechanical riding buck, covered in blue material. The rig could move and jolt him around, simulating the uneven motion of riding a huge animal. So when Boga gallops, turns, or jumps, Ewan's body is physically reacting to those movements, rather than simply pretending they're happening. After filming, ILM could digitally remove the blue rig and replace it with a fully rendered Varactyl. These rigs may disappear completely in the final movie, but they played an important role. They gave the actors real movement, weight, and momentum to react to, making the finished CGI sequences feel much more believable. Just before Anakin arrives on Mustafar, we see the Separatist leaders gathered together, and if you look closely at Nute Gunray and the other Neimoidians, you'll notice something fascinating. Although they're behaving like real characters on the set, their faces are completely non-human. Those long faces, moving eyes, and changing mouths were created using sophisticated practical creature effects and animatronics. By 2005, ILM could create highly detailed digital characters, but for the Neimoidians, the production still relied heavily on physical creature technology. The head wasn't simply a rigged mask. Inside it was a compact mechanical system that could remotely control different facial movements. For Revenge of the Sith, the technology used for the Neimoidians had been refined and miniaturized compared with earlier designs. These mechanisms and electronics could be packed into the character's head, reducing the amount of bulky equipment that had previously been required elsewhere on the performer's body. The same practical creature philosophy was taken to a much larger scale on Kashyyyk, where the movie suddenly shows an enormous Wookiee army fighting across the battlefield. But the production didn't have hundreds of Wookiee costumes. In fact, the creature department created only 8 full Wookiee suits for the film. Among the performers were Peter Mayhew as Chewbacca, while Australian basketball player Michael Kingma played Tarful. Other unusually tall Australian performers, including professional basketball players, were recruited to make the Wookiees feel genuinely enormous next to the human characters. These practical performers formed the foundation of the army. The same limited number of suits could then be filmed in different positions and combinations, with interchangeable weapons and costume pieces helping make individual Wookiees look different. The filmmakers then used digital effects to multiply those practical performers into the much larger army visible in the background. So when you see what looks like hundreds of Wookiees charging across Kashyyyk, you're actually looking at a combination of 8 practical costumes, tall performers, repeated photography, and digital generated Wookiees. It was a much more efficient way to create an enormous alien army, while still keeping real Wookiees physically present in the foreground. On the surface, Padme Amidala's apartment on Coruscant looks like a completely digital environment, but there was actually a lot of practical filmmaking happening right in front of the camera. For Star Wars Episode 3, the production built physical sections of Padme's apartment, complete with real walls, furniture, architectural details, and other set pieces that allow the actors to physically walk through the space and interact with their surroundings. But the moment the camera looked through the windows or beyond the veranda, the production had to create an entirely different world. Instead of building an enormous section of Coruscant outside the apartment, the open areas were filmed against blue screen. ILM could then replace those areas with expansive digital backgrounds and matte-painted environments, creating the illusion that Padme's apartment was surrounded by the gigantic futuristic skyline of Coruscant. To bring C-3PO into the scene, the filmmakers took an approach that had already become iconic throughout the Star Wars series. Instead of creating the gold droid entirely inside a computer, Anthony Daniels was actually inside the C-3PO costume, performing the character physically on set. Daniels returned as C-3PO for Revenge of the Sith, once again wearing the practical gold suit. Contemporary production reports even document Daniels shooting scenes with Natalie Portman on the Padme apartment balcony set. And for Episode 3, C-3PO's costume received some noticeable changes. George Lucas wanted the character to retain his familiar bright golden appearance, so C-3PO was given a highly polished gold finish. At the same time, the costume was modified to make it more comfortable and practical for Daniels to perform in. Getting into C-3PO was still a fairly involved process. Daniels would first wear the black undergarments and lightweight costume pieces underneath the suit. Then the individual components, including the torso, arms, legs, feet, and finally the head, were assembled around him. That meant the movement you see from C-3PO wasn't simply an animator controlling a digital character, but that practical approach created an unexpected problem for the visual effects team. C-3PO was extremely reflective. For Episode 3, the filmmakers intentionally kept his golden exterior highly polished, and whenever Daniel stood in front of a blue screen or green screen, the screen itself could be reflected directly across the shiny surface of the costume. And it wasn't just the blue screen. Lights, cameras, crew members, and other elements around the set could potentially appear as reflections across C-3PO's metallic body. That meant ILM couldn't simply isolate C-3PO from the blue screen and place him into the digital environment. They also had to deal with what was already reflected on his body. This made the post-production work surprisingly complicated. So that perfectly clean golden surface you see in the finished movie wasn't necessarily what the camera captured straight out of the gate. The effects artists had to carefully track the reflective areas, remove unwanted colors and reflections, and recreate more appropriate reflections so that C-3PO would appear naturally integrated into the Coruscant environment. Even though the character was physically present on set, that didn't mean the visual effects team simply left him untouched. The practical costume provided the physical performance, lighting, interaction, and presence of the actor, while ILM could digitally refine what the camera had captured and integrate the character into the much larger digital environment. And C-3PO wasn't always limited to the physical suit. Throughout the prequel trilogy, digital imagery was also used for certain C-3PO shots when the filmmakers needed things that couldn't be achieved practically. Anthony Daniels continued providing the character's performance and voice work across these different versions of C-3PO. And that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed these kinds of behind-the-scenes filmmaking tricks, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. And I'll see you in the next video.